South of mainland Japan, where the Pacific cuts against black volcanic rock, sits Hachijo-jima. Winds are strong, soil is thin. Typhoons arrive without warning. Nothing about the island suggests comfort or abundance. Yet for generations, its residents have lived unusually long lives. Reaching 90 is common. Living past 100 is not rare. There was no longevity program here, no clinics, no supplements, no exported wisdom. Life followed a simple rhythm shaped by isolation. Fishing when the seas allowed it, farming what could survive salt spray and poor ground, eating what grew nearby day after day, year after year. Doctors and demographers began paying attention in the 20th century, not because the people were chasing long life, but because they weren't. Chronic disease appeared later. Mobility lasted longer. Cognitive decline came slowly, if at all. Diet logs showed few excesses. Meals were modest, repetitive, and seasonal. One detail kept returning: a leafy green, harvested fresh, cooked simply, eaten daily. Not as medicine, not as a cure, just food. Older residents spoke of it casually. It grew fast, it survived storms. When other crops failed, it returned. During periods of isolation, war, and food shortages, it remained dependable. Children ate it without being told why. Elders never called it special. For most of its history, the plant stayed on the island. It did not travel far. It was not promoted. It was not studied. It simply remained part of daily life, while the people who ate it kept aging differently from the rest of the world. Only later would anyone ask whether the two were connected. You see, the plant did not arrive on the island by accident. It was already there when people were sent away. For centuries, Hachijo-jima served as a place of exile during Japan's feudal era. Political dissidents, disgraced officials, and criminals were banished there by order of the shogunate. Escape was unlikely. Supply ships were irregular. Survival depended on what the island itself could provide. The conditions were unforgiving. Volcanic soil shifted easily. Salt spray damaged fragile crops. Typhoons flattened fields without warning. Rice failed often. Wheat struggled. Famine was not theoretical, it was cyclical. Islanders learned quickly which plants could not be trusted. One endured. Ashitaba, with its thick, hollow stems and broad leaves, thrived where others failed. When cut, its yellow sap bled from the stem, and within a day, new shoots began to form. Harvesting did not weaken it. It strengthened its return. Exiles were taught to grow it not as medicine, but as insurance. Leaves were picked constantly. Stems were eaten young. Nothing was wasted. When storms destroyed gardens, Ashitaba reappeared first. When supply ships failed to dock, it filled bowls again. Over time, necessity became routine. The plant moved from survival measure to daily habit. Leaves were boiled, stir-fried, dried for tea. Meals remained modest and repetitive by geography, not design. Ashitaba fit that rhythm without ceremony. Children ate it because adults cooked it. Elders passed down planting knowledge without explanation. It was never praised, it was relied upon. For generations, Ashitaba existed the same way it always had. Quietly, daily, uncelebrated. No one ate it expecting a discovery. No one measured what it might be doing beneath the surface. For decades, Ashitaba remained off the scientific radar. It was not rare enough to attract curiosity, and it was not exotic enough to raise alarms. Researchers studying longevity focused elsewhere: calories, genetics, exercise. The plant stayed in kitchens, not laboratories. That changed quietly in the early 2000s. Biochemists analyzing traditional foods in Japan began isolating compounds unique to Ashitaba's yellow sap. They identified a class of polyphenols known as chalcones, present in unusually high concentrations compared to other edible plants. One compound in particular drew attention: 4,4-dimethoxychalcone. At the time, researchers were deeply interested in autophagy, the cellular recycling process activated during fasting and caloric restriction. Autophagy clears damaged proteins and dysfunctional components from cells. In animal models, activating this process had already been linked to longer lifespan and reduced age-related disease. Laboratory tests revealed something unexpected. Chalcones extracted from Ashitaba activated autophagy pathways without the need for starvation. Cells exposed to the compound began the same internal cleanup process triggered by fasting, while still receiving nutrients. This was not a miracle claim. It did not stop aging. It did not reverse time. But it did something rare. It mimicked one of the most consistently validated longevity mechanisms in biology through a compound found in a food eaten daily by one population. The discovery did not come from longevity research on the island itself. It came from curiosity about a plant no one thought to question. Ashitaba had never been studied because people believed in it. It was studied because no one did. Only later did researchers begin asking why a plant consumed casually for generations carried a compound. Modern science had spent decades trying to activate artificially. Until then, compounds capable of doing this were studied as pharmaceuticals or produced synthetically in labs. Here was one coming from a leafy green eaten casually by a small population for generations. No isolation protocol, no dosage optimization, no commercial design. Researchers took note. Subsequent studies examined related chalcones and their effects on metabolic stress, inflammation, and cellular aging. Interest grew, not because Ashitaba was ancient, but because its biology aligned with one of the most reproducible mechanisms in aging science. For the first time, modern research had language for what islanders had never tried to explain. Ashitaba was no longer just resilient food. It had entered the scientific timeline. And with that recognition came a new problem. Well, scientific recognition changed Ashitaba's position overnight. What had lived quietly in kitchens now existed on paper, inside journals, attached to pathways and mechanisms. That shift mattered. In modern systems, food is tolerated, compounds are regulated. Once a plant is associated with a specific biological effect, it no longer moves freely through the same channels as ordinary vegetables. The question is no longer how people eat it. The question becomes how it is classified. Ashitaba sits in an uncomfortable space. It is not a novel substance. It has been consumed safely in Japan for centuries. It is not a drug. It is eaten as food. But it contains a compound that modern science studies for its ability to activate autophagy, a process also targeted by pharmaceutical research. That overlap creates friction. In the United States, regulation does not follow history. It follows claims. Foods that imply physiological effects beyond basic nutrition face scrutiny. Compounds linked to cellular pathways associated with disease prevention or longevity are often evaluated through the same frameworks used for drugs, even when they come from plants. Ashitaba was never introduced to the American market as a staple vegetable. There was no long-standing record of domestic consumption, no generational familiarity, no agricultural base. When interest finally arrived, it arrived through research, supplements, and health claims. That timing mattered. By the time Ashitaba reached American awareness, it was no longer just food. It was associated with fasting mimicking effects, metabolic regulation, and cellular cleanup. Those associations changed how regulators viewed it, regardless of how it had been used elsewhere. The plant itself had not changed. The system around it had. And in that system, foods that blur the line between nourishment and biological effect often face barriers that have nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. And maybe that's why you can't buy it in America. Because in the United States, fresh plants do not become food by tradition. They become food by approval. Importation, cultivation, and sale of fresh plant material are regulated primarily through agricultural and food safety frameworks designed to prevent pests, invasive species, and unverified health claims. Ashitaba never cleared that path. Because it is not a historically consumed crop in the US, fresh Ashitaba requires agricultural approval to be imported or widely cultivated. That approval has never been granted at scale. The plant is fast-growing, resilient, and spreads aggressively in suitable conditions, traits that trigger concern under US plant import and invasive species regulations. Without approval, commercial sale of the fresh plant is effectively blocked. At the same time, Ashitaba became known in America through research and supplements, not kitchens. That distinction matters. Once a plant is introduced primarily through extracts and capsules, regulators treat it differently. Fresh vegetables are expected to behave like food. Ashitaba arrived carrying claims, studies, and biochemical interest. The Food and Drug Administration does not approve foods based on tradition abroad. It evaluates safety, classification, and claims within US law. Ashitaba has never been approved as a conventional fresh food crop, and no health claims tied to it are authorized, so the result is quiet and confusing. You can buy Ashitaba powder, you can buy capsules, you can buy extracts, but you cannot walk into an American grocery store and buy the fresh leaves the way island families have eaten them for centuries. Not because it was proven dangerous, but because it never fit cleanly into the system that decides what food is allowed to be. So they accepted it in the form they know how to control. But interestingly, Ashitaba never disappeared. It still grows where it always has, on steep volcanic slopes where soil is thin and storms erase weaker plants. Islanders still cut it, watch it bleed yellow sap, and return the next day to find new shoots waiting. Nothing about the plant changed when science noticed it. Nothing changed when regulation stalled it. It continues at its own pace. The knowledge did not vanish either. It was never hidden. It simply remained local. What changed was distance. Distance between how food is lived with and how food is managed. Distance between plants that grow where people live and systems that decide what qualifies as food. Ashitaba fell into that gap. In Japan, it is still treated as a vegetable. In the United States, it exists mostly as a label, powdered, encapsulated, reduced to claims it is not allowed to make. The fresh plant remains largely absent, not because it failed, but because no pathway was built for it to arrive as it is. Forgetting in modern systems rarely looks dramatic. It happens when something is simply left out. Ashitaba still grows where it always has. The research is published, the history is documented, islanders still eat it daily. The only thing missing is access. The plant has not changed. It has not been redesigned or scaled for markets. It grows back after it is cut, just as it always has. What happens next is not a question of biology, it is a question of classification. Ashitaba has been there all along, and that's it. Now to you, what else might we already have lost? Not because it failed, but because no one remembered to bring it with us. Share your thoughts in the comments section below, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.